Now, without any further ado, it's a great honor to present the Nobel Laureate Czeslaw Milosz.
I am going to read my poetry in translation. I have been living in America a long time, but continuing to write in Polish because the language, you know, if you change the language, you change personality. And besides, my poetry in the original, my native tongue is better probably than written, than had I been writing in English. I would start with a poem, Rue Descartes. When I was a young poet, every poet from my part of Europe was supposed to spend some time as an apprentice in the capital of the world, at that time Paris. And many years later, returning to that city, I wrote that poem by passing Rue Descartes. By passing Rue Descartes, I descended towards the Seine, shy, a traveler, a young barbarian, just come to the capital of the world. We were many, from Jassy and Kolochvar, Vilno and Bucharest, Saigon and Marrakesh, ashamed to remember the customs of our homes, about which nobody here should ever be told, the clapping for servants, barefooted girls hurry in, dividing food with incantations, choral prayers, recited by master and household together. I had left the cloudy provinces behind. I entered the universal, dazzled and desiring. Soon enough, many from Jassy and Kolochvar or Saigon or Marrakesh would be killed because they wanted to abolish the customs of their homes. Soon enough, their peers were seizing power in order to kill in the name of the universal beautiful ideas. Meanwhile, the city behaved in accordance with its nature, rustling with throaty laughter in the dark, baking long breads and pouring wine into clay pitchers, buying fish, lemons, and garlic at street markets, indifferent as it was to honor and shame and greatness and glory, because that had been done already and had transformed itself into monuments representing nobody knows whom, into arias hardly audible, and into turns of speech. Again, I lean on the rough granite of the embankment, as if I had returned from travels through the underworlds, and suddenly saw in the light the reeling wheel of the seasons, where empires have fallen, and those once living are now dead. There is no capital of the world, neither here nor anywhere else, and the abolished customs are restored to their small fame, and now I know that the time of human generations is not like the time of the earth. As to my heavy sins, I remember one most vividly. How one day, walking on a forest path along a stream, I pushed a rock down onto a water snake coiled in the grass. And what I have met with in life was the just punishment which reaches sooner or later the breaker of a taboo. As a commentary to this poem, I must add that I was born in Lithuania, which was the last country in Europe to accept Christianity, and many pagan beliefs survived. The water snake was a holy creature in Lithuania, and there was a taboo, and one shouldn't harm a water snake.
Do you think that the idea of progress is antithetical to poetry?
Well, it seems to me that we have been living for a long time with the notion of movement of history, and the movement of history towards some sort of accomplishment. It goes back to Joachim of Fiore, a medieval monk who saw in history of mankind three epochs: the era of the Father, the era of the Son, and the future era of the Holy Spirit. And of course it has been taken over by romantics and combined with various modern utopias. But it has been a world constantly moving in a direction. It depends, of course, what sort of beliefs, what direction. But it's hard to imagine a world completely static. And poetry has been connected with a vision of a certain movement towards. Even if we take Ezra Pound and Ezra Pound's folly, insanity of considering that fascist movement was sort of implementation of order, moral order. There is that element also, certain accomplishment. Well, he was from Confucius, but that was all mixed up in his head. So poetry has been tempted by a dream of paradise, or at least of a good society. At the present moment, we live through quite a crisis of utopias. Utopias, even modest utopias, like for instance a welfare state in Sweden, proved to be terribly boring. And Marxist utopias proved largely to be failures first of all from economic point of view, but also the vital core, namely of a dream. The question arises, what for? And the question, of course, is being asked now in the Soviet Union. What for those millions and millions killed under Stalin? So we are now maybe at a turning point. It is true that we always live in a turning point. History is living in a turning point. But now there is a big questioning. For me, I doubt whether modern man can live in a purely static, not dynamic society, not moving with any sense that we are moving in any direction. But I don't know. I have to leave it to my successors. Well, maybe I should read a poem, a fragment of a long poem from the Rising of the Sun. This fragment is about my city where I went to school and university, and which is Vilnius, the capital, today capital of Lithuania, Lithuanian Soviet Republic. Whoever is born just once on earth could have been that man whom Isis visited in a dream and have gone through an initiation to say afterwards, I saw. I saw the radiant sun at midnight. I trod Proserpina's threshold. I passed through all the elements and returned. I came into the presence of the gods below and the gods above and adored them face to face. This is taken from Apuleius, the Golden Ass, mostly. Or a gladiator, a slave, under an inscription on a level stone, I was not, I was, I am not, I do not desire. Most distinguished voyager, from where do you hail? My city, in a valley among wooded hills, under a fortified castle, at the meeting of two rivers, was famous for its ornate temples, churches, Catholic and Orthodox, synagogues and mosques. Our country cultivated rye and flax. It rafted timber as well. Our army was composed of a lancer regiment, dragoons, and a regiment of Tartar horsemen. The postal stamps of our state represented phantasms sculpted long ago by two artists, friends or enemies, Pietro and Giovanni. Our schools taught dogmatics, apologetics, sentences from the Talmud at Titus Livius. Aristotle was highly regarded, though not as highly as sack races and jumping over fires on St. John's Eve. Most distinguished voyager, what was your eon like? Comic. Terror is forgotten. Only the ridiculous is remembered by posterity. Death from a wound, from a noose, from starvation is one death. But folly is uncounted and new every year. I took part. I tied neckties for no purpose and danced dances for no purpose. A customer, a buyer of sweaters and pomade, a mimicker, a shy guest, a fop impressed by his reflection in shop windows. I was overgrown by the bark of unconsciousness. I tried hard to imagine another earth and could not. I tried hard to imagine another heaven and could not. It seems to me that people can be divided into two basic temperaments, two basic categories. One temperament is for the external reality and tending towards external reality. And another temperament is denying that any reality independently of our mind exists. I do not speak here of philosophy. Of course, various philosophical schools are, let us say, embodiments of those two opposed temperaments. And I consider that I belong to that first temperament, namely tending towards external reality. I have a constant feeling of disparity between reality and the language, words. And I would describe my poetry as a hopeless search and pursuit of reality.
Well, by reality, do you mean a kind?
What reality is, we don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, it's almost like you're saying reality is God.
Well, I would be inclined to a medieval interpretation. Medieval interpretation, of course, what is the most intense, most dense, and most endowed with being is God.
Isn't that the same thing that one could say of poetry?
About intensity and well, that's very mysterious, because if you there were poets, of course, who pursued that goal to make their poetry a kind of an absolute substitute for the word, like Mallarmé. But the results are ambiguous, because the more a poet pursues absolute purity, the more the goal escapes. Reality. What can we do with it? Where is it in words? Just as it flickers, it vanishes. Innumerable lives unremembered. Cities on maps only, without that face in the window, on the first floor by the market, without those two in the bushes near the gas plant. Returning seasons, mountain snows, oceans, and the blue ball of the earth rotates, but silent are they who ran through artillery fire, who clung to a lump of clay for protection, and those deported from their homes at dawn, and those who have crawled out from under a pile of bodies. While here I, an instructor in forgetting, teach that pain passes, for it's the pain of others. Still in my mind, trying to save Miss Jadwiga, a little hunchback, librarian by profession, who perished in the shelter of the apartment house that was considered safe, but toppled down, and no one was able to dig through the slabs of wall, though knocking and voices were heard for many days. So a name is lost for ages, forever. No one will ever know about her last hours. Time carries her in layers of the Pliocene. The true enemy of man is generalization. The true enemy of man, so-called history, attracts and terrifies with its plural number. Don't believe it. Cunning and treacherous. History is not, as Marx told us, anti-nature. And if a goddess of blind faith. The little skeleton of Miss Jadwiga, the spot where her heart was pulsating, this only I set against necessity, law, theory.
Do you feel that being a poet has affected your sense of politics?
You see, poetry has always been on the very limit of social and political commitments. If you take in the time, let us say, of the Reformation, when religion played the role of politics, largely of politics today, poets were either on the Catholic side or Protestant side, in any case in my part of Europe, in Poland. And they used to write theological treatises. Sometimes they are remembered only because of those theological treatises, sometimes vice versa. Those theological treatises are not considered important at all. So I guess that I have paid my dues to the 20th century through various imbroglios and various involvements with politics. Very reluctantly, though. I asked about politics and history. I always answer that a poet should try to avoid both as far as possible. However, there are situations when you are collared or cornered, and it's very difficult to escape. Proof. This is a short poem. Some critics interpreted that as referring to historical cruel events of our century, but I guess this is a very personal poem, and I guess that many in the audience here know by experience what I am talking about. Proof. And yet, you experience the flames of hell. You can even say what they are like, real, ending in sharp hooks, so that they tear up flesh piece by piece to the bone. You walked in the street, and it was going on, the lashing and bleeding. You remember, therefore you have no doubt, there is a hell for certain. And since this is a very pessimistic poem, maybe I would read a poem a little less pessimistic. Pure beauty, benediction. You are all I gathered from a life that was bitter and confused, in which I learned about evil, my own and not my own. Wonder kept seizing me, and I recall only wonder. Risings of the sun over endless green, a universe of grasses, and flowers opening to the first light, blue outline of the mountain, and a Hosanna shout. I asked how many times, is this the truth of the earth? How can laments and curses be turned into hymns? What makes you need to pretend when you know better? But the lips praised on their own the feet ran, the heart beat strongly, and the tongue proclaimed its adoration.
Have you found in your life that your responsibilities as a poet have changed at all?
You notice a paradox of writing with the passage of years. For instance, in 1950, when I was really in a bad fix, I was still in the service of the Polish communist government, and I was horrified by what was going on, and I wrote a short poem entitled "You Who Harmed a Simple Man." I couldn't publish that poem at that time. 30 years later, that poem was placed on the monument in Gdańsk, erected for the workers killed in a battle with police. But that poem was written pure for myself only, not for any audience. So little. I said so little. Days were short. Short days, short nights, short years. I said so little, I couldn't keep up. My heart grew weary from joy, despair, ardor, hope. The jaws of Leviathan were closing upon me. Naked, I lay on the shores of desert islands. The white whale of the world hold me down to its pit. And now I don't know what in all that was real. Thank you.
When you look back on your work, I mean, do you feel that it's been like a series of tragic failures? I mean, you seem to say it's an impossibility to really accomplish.
I guess that striving is the most important, and as to the achievement, I don't know. And there is a constant striving, and I believe that I would like to believe that with my death I would discover ultimate reality. Because I feel that ultimate reality is behind this tree and inside the tree, and I would like to reach that ultimate reality. Poetry was part of that reaching, going to the other side, so to say, of the curve.